Hi, welcome to episode 38 of Talk About the Passion. This is the first episode of 2019, and I'm glad to be back and hope to bring you some great episodes in the new year. Speaking of great episodes, my guest today is Kevin Grant, and the name of the episode is Break My Body, which some of you may know is the name of a Pixies song. There's some talk of the Pixies in this episode as well as some talk about what it was like working with Steve Albini on a number of recordings with his band, The Hidden. The Hidden are no longer a thing, and as you'll hear in this episode, Kevin has been in a number of groups, most notably Gaskill. The story about his first time meeting members of what would become Gaskill is pretty hilarious. He talks about the history of the New Bedford club that was having shows for a long time called the New Wave Cafe. There's a lot of information there. I certainly didn't know about that place, and so that's pretty cool to hear about that. Kevin's a pretty intense guy with some really intelligent and original takes on music and the role it takes in his life, as well as, out in the world. We talked for a little over 2 hours, and I think every part of this conversation was pretty interesting. So sit back and enjoy this one. Since it's been so long, and this is an extra long episode, I'm going to cut this short and say a couple more things, and we'll get you on your way. I'm on social media. You can follow me, this podcast, if you search for Talk About the Passion podcast on Facebook or Instagram. I have a Twitter account, but I rarely update anything on that, so I don't know why I'm telling you that. Check my social media pages for information about upcoming guests, past guests, and what they're up to. I do giveaways here and there, and so please follow me there to stay up to date with that kind of stuff. You can listen to me on all the normal places you listen to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play. I'm on Spotify. If you or someone you know would like to be on an upcoming episode, please reach out to me on one of those social media platforms, and we'll get a conversation going. Okay, enough of that. Let's get to today's episode, 2019, episode 38, Break My Body with Kevin Grant. Thanks for listening. So I'm here with Kevin Grant. Thank you for coming down here.
No, thanks for having me.
From New Bedford.
Yep.
And you grew up there?
I grew up in Fall River.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, I've lived most of my life growing up in Fall River. I only moved away when I was 17. I moved out on my own to go to college. Mm-hmm. I had started school early, so I went away to college kind of early, but and then periodically moved back with my parents and stuff like that. Yeah. But I've been in New Bedford now for about 10 years. Yeah. On and off in New Bedford for a long time. But.
Yeah. And for people that don't really know that area, what's Fall River? What kind of
where to begin?
Place is that?
It's a tough town. If to describe it to somebody without any reference points, it's like a down on its luck textile New England city. Unfortunately, it's got a lot of problems, a lot of unemployment, a lot of poverty, crime, drugs, etc. However, it used to be one of the wealthiest cities in the world about 100 to 150 years ago, and a lot of the beauty of that time still exists there. So a lot of the grand old homes are there. Some of them have been converted into apartments or are in disrepair, and a lot of the city parks. Frederick Law Olmsted did a lot of the city parks. He did Central Park in New York City. Right. So there's a lot of beauty in the city, despite its problems, and it's it's a tough place. It's very similar to what you'd see in some of the Rust Belt cities. Right. Very industrial, a lot of abandoned buildings. Right. The population is much lower than it once was at one point. And it doesn't, unlike New Bedford, where I live now, where there's a thriving fishing industry, there is no thriving industry in Fall River. Yeah. Leads the state, I think, in drug problems and stuff like that. But my family has, my dad's side came to Fall River in the 1800s from Ireland. I've been there ever since. Yeah. So my family history goes way back. So it's tough because, you know, when I'm there, it's like, it's definitely all the homesick feelings and
Right.
And positive feelings you have from a place that you have deep roots with, but at the same time, it would take a pretty high level of delusion to not be somewhat honest. I mean, it has
Right.
a terrible reputation.
Right.
If you're from around here, you're well aware of the
Yeah,
reputation that it
right.
has.
I feel like cities like that too, though, people that are from there or like you've had family there have a hard time like disparaging that because you have roots and you know what it was like. And
there are things about it that, you know, I think geographically it's built almost on the side of it's almost too steep to build on much of the city.
Right.
And as a result, you have these amazing views of the water and looking out towards Providence. I mean, you can just see for miles and miles. And
right.
and as a result, it's at times a very surprisingly beautiful place.
Right.
And that can't ever go away. It's just the lay of the land. And there's a lot of history. There's a lot of because it's so cheap to live there, it's become a very much more diverse city than it was when I was growing up. And there's a lot of really great, really cheap, authentic food from lots of different ethnic groups, if you know where to look.
Right.
So it's not completely devoid of charm.
Right.
But it's a tough place for sure.
Yeah. And growing up there, you know, what did you do for fun?
Both my parents were school teachers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's funny. My dad was an art teacher. He was also a former Marine sergeant. He was much older than my mom, mm-hmm. and he had joined the Marines during the Korean War. He didn't go overseas. But he signed up just to sort of get out of the city.
Right.
And he also wanted a way to pay for college because he wanted to study art. Mm-hmm. And my grandparents weren't having that. They wanted him to be a state trooper, you know.
Yeah.
And so he figured that would be his way to sort of write his own ticket into college and do what he wanted to. Mm-hmm. So he did that. And his... that kind of experience and that sort of background really kind of made him the guy who he was. So he could be a very, you know, it's like you never leave the Marines in some ways.
Of course.
And at the same time, he had this art background, but he was very old school. He didn't really have any time for modern art at all.
Right.
He kind of hated it.
Mm-hmm.
He was very, very old school. He didn't really was not a fan of like pop culture in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
So we, like growing up, we didn't have a color TV mm-hmm. or cable or a VCR or stuff like that. And he, you know, there was like zero rock and roll in the house.
Yeah.
Plus he was older, you know, he you know, by the time rock and roll and stuff like that came out, my dad was in his 30s.
Right.
It's like my dad listened to jazz and like classical music and stuff, but was very, very, you know, we went to art museums. Mm-hmm. I never went to Disney World.
Right.
And most of the movies that came out, like when we were kids, that all of people of our generation would have seen, if I've seen them, it's because I saw them as an adult, like 20 or 30 years later. So like I've never seen, I don't think I've ever seen the original Terminator.
Right.
Or like any of the horror movies or none of that stuff. Or like the popular TV shows. Like I never own, or like I never owned Thriller.
Right.
Never owned it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until probably middle school that I even really understood like what music videos were.
Right.
I had no idea. You know, I didn't have any older siblings. Right. I have one sister who's younger. Mm-hmm. So as a result, you know, I spent a lot of time reading. I definitely was. There were a lot of upsides to that. Like I'm not trying to say like woe is me or whatever, but at the same time, I don't think my upbringing was necessarily that typical.
Right.
So by the time, and I was going to Fall River Public Schools, so, mm-hmm. and I was younger. My parents started me in school when I was 4 years old.
Okay.
So by the time I got to middle school, which was like a bigger school and very like inner city public school, you know. And you know, everybody's like becoming a preteen and sort of like figuring out who they're going to hang out with and what kind of person they want to be. I was sort of painfully disconnected.
Yeah.
And to the extent where it was pretty clear that I was not going to succeed socially in those areas.
Yeah.
And at the same, and it was kind of like, well, why should I try?
Right.
You know, but at the same time, it's not, you know, Fall River is not like a big, like you don't have a lot of like options culturally.
Right.
You know, it's not a college town. There's nothing. It's you don't really have a lot of options. Like, you know, it's not as easy as just saying, well, I'm just going to do my own thing.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
So, and this was the mid '80s.
Yeah.
So eventually, I ended up falling in with some guys. It was kind of like there wasn't really a set thing. It was like a couple of my friends ended up with skateboards.
Right.
I saw some guys skateboarding in my neighborhood. I had skateboarded a bit growing up, but I could tell that it was like this sort of parallel world. It was
right.
like here's the regular world, which at the time was like you know, Air Jordans,
right,
and let's see, I don't even know how to describe what was going on.
MTV culture and that kind of stuff.
Like Rob Bass and DJ
Yeah.
Easy Rock and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Air Jordans, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And it's a very like, Fall River's a very sort of like street city. Like,
Right.
like breakdancing was big when I was growing up.
Yeah.
With kids, not with me, but like,
Right.
or, you know, graffiti and breakdancing,
Yeah.
you know, but you wouldn't see like heavy metal anywhere.
Right.
There was
Right.
it just didn't exist
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
So when I saw that was going on, and I was like, you know, this is sort of like something separate and completely detached in a way that it doesn't seem to really be concerned with this other stuff that is completely alien to me.
Right.
I sort of just gravitated towards it. And at the same time, it provided me, that whole little scene did have a conduit to getting culture from outside of the city.
Right.
The skateboarding was so small at the time, you know, pre X Games and all that stuff.
Right.
That, you know, the city had maybe 90,000 people in it. There were maybe 20 or 30 skateboarders.
Right.
And so that meant that if you skated and you were 11 or 12 years old, you were skating with the guys who were 18.
Yeah.
And just because that was what you guys did, you
Right.
know, like there wasn't a lot of people who were into this very kind of sort of obscure thing.
Right.
That people get very devoted to. So if you had that, suddenly people were like making copies of tapes for you.
Right.
And letting you borrow skateboard magazines that you wouldn't be able to find on a shelf within 30 or 40 miles.
Right.
But suddenly you were getting old copies.
Yeah.
And a copy of a tape that was a copy of a tape that was
Right.
a copy of a tape. So you just became clued into all these different, you know, it wasn't so much like, well, if you're into skateboards, you're into like, here's your haircut and here's your outfit and
Right.
here's your bands. It was more like, if you're into this obscure thing, you suddenly are falling in with people who are into obscure things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Especially back then, where it was like you either knew about cool stuff, you didn't know about cool
Right.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And those were the two categories before
Right.
the internet and
Yeah.
YouTube and stuff. So if you listened to the Violent Femmes, the odds were also pretty high that you listened to the Dead Kennedys.
Right.
And you listened to Public Enemy.
Right.
And you listened to the Ultramagnetic MCs.
Right.
And you listened to the Sex Pistols.
Right.
Because as very diverse and different as those things were, they were all in this category where it was under the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to know people to know about this stuff.
Right.
So you either appreciated this sort of underground culture or you didn't. And there wasn't really any pressure to be like, well, you know, like I'm into like British goth bands, and that's my thing.
Yeah.
That would be like a kind of a weird thing at the time.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. I don't think that kids.
It wasn't cliquey.
No, not really. And you really relied on people to help you find stuff.
Right.
And you tried to be someone who could help other people discover things too. Right. Because you were that's the only way that stuff got moved around and passed around, you know. So by the time I was, you know, in 6th and 7th grade, I was listening to a lot of the stuff that I listen to now. So I was, you know, one of the first albums I bought was In God We Trust Incorporated, and I was like 11 or something. And, you know, I was really into the Ramones and the Sex Pistols, the Dead Kennedys, Public Enemy, the Beastie Boys, the Violent Femmes, the Cure, the Smiths. And it was only because of my upbringing at home,
right,
combined with how young I was when I started school, combined with falling in with skateboarding, I never had the typical awkward years where I was like really into like Winger,
right,
or you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like where I had a fade, a high top fade with like lines in my eyebrows or anything.
Right. Yeah.
And so I lucked out sort of in those ways. Like early on, I was like, this stuff really interests me and fascinates me, and there's a lot of there's a lot of substance to this stuff that I think will fuel me for a long time.
Yeah.
So that was great in that sense, and I suddenly had a kind of a crew of guys, some of whom were significantly older,
right,
where some of the trials and tribulations of being a kid in Fall River were alleviated due to that.
Yeah.
Some of these guys were just crazy guys.
Right.
For better and for worse.
Right.
And you know, so as time went on, and I started my first band. I was like in 7th grade.
Okay.
Like me and my friend, we started a band called the Brain Dead Geniuses.
Okay.
And it was kind of like Old Skull.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it was, you know, acoustic guitar, some crappy Casio.
Yeah.
And we just made tapes at his house.
Yeah.
And drew our logo everywhere and told everybody we were the best band in the world.
Yeah.
And that was the extent of that band.
Right.
And by the time, you know, my parents were getting pretty concerned.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these guys were like the troublemakers of the school and came from bad backgrounds.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was like, you know, most of them were great guys. Even the ones who were super rough around the edges.
Right.
Some of them were genuinely not great guys.
Right.
And I think my parents saw me going to high school as a risky proposition.
Right.
Given like some of
those types of guys.
Yeah. And so they were like, there's no way that that's happening. Like you cannot. So my mom was teaching at a Catholic high school. Mm-hmm. It's actually the school where my parents had met. They'd both been teachers there back in the 60s.
Oh, okay.
And because of how long she had worked there, the tuition would be free for me to go. So that's where I ended up going.
Okay.
Now, I still lived in Fall River with all my friends.
Right.
So my contact with those guys didn't really change.
Right.
I had my life outside of school and on the weekends, and then in school I found, you know, a handful of friends, but it was like a big culture shock.
Yeah.
A lot of the kids had a good amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, a lot of them had come from very sheltered backgrounds.
Right.
So even like the popular kids in the school. So it's like, you know, 1991.
Right.
And the kids are listening to like Clapton.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like nobody was like like the cool kids were listening to like Zeppelin and Clapton.
Right. Yeah.
And not in like an ironic way.
Right.
Like
just that was
they're like, you know, we listen to Rush.
Right.
Like what do you mean? Like
yeah.
You like Fugazi?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like the
right.
And the girls listen to like James Taylor.
Right.
and there was nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, I was like, I felt like I was kind of a city kid,
right.
And a lot of these kids came from, they'd grown up like in some of the. I'm making huge generalizations, but like affluent backgrounds, and not in cities, out towards the Cape, so like Marion and Mattapoisett, or but I made some very good friends who I'm still friends with to this day, by going to that school, who I never would have become friends with, and some who were, despite my generalizations, extremely well versed. I mean, one of my best friends was this kid from Westport, who I'm still good friends with, who was like a hip hop encyclopedia. This like massive cassette collection of hip hop, and just a very funny, very, very in his own way cultured, and to this day, like just a really cool guy who I'm still friends with. So I did have some friends, but at the same time, it was tough. I mean, there was almost nobody who was into any of the things that I was into, and it was a very small school.
Right.
Uniforms every day, ties every day. My mom was a teacher at the school.
Yeah. So you were.
I was not the happiest kid.
Yeah. And would that stuff have been looked down on? Like if they knew you're listening to, In God We Trust.
Well, yeah, and I would definitely push the envelope as much as I could get away with.
Yeah.
So, I grew a beard and was like growing my hair out, and they were like, eventually they pulled me aside and were like, you can't, like, you got to do something about this.
Right.
So I shaved my head with like a razor blade and shaving cream and stuff. That didn't go over well.
Yeah.
There was a rule, like, you had to wear dress shoes to school, and you couldn't wear sneakers. So I was wearing combat boots. They pulled me aside and said, your shoes have to be like, 4 eyelets or less. Yeah. So I cut the tops off the boots so that they were like low cut. It was awful. You know what I mean? I hated being there.
Yeah.
I was getting through it, and I had at the same time I was having some of the best times ever outside of school.
Yeah.
Just skateboarding all the time, every night.
Yeah.
And I was spending a lot of time in Newport, just crashing on people's couches and stuff like that. And I was going to tons of shows.
Yeah.
There was a pretty vibrant hardcore scene at the time.
Yeah. In Newport or just
New Bedford.
New Bedford
and Newport and all the surrounding towns. Like we would drive, whoever had a working car, we'd like pile into a car and go to shows in Worcester, Springfield, Amherst. And it was a really a great scene. There were some bands that I really liked that I saw all the time, and I was really there were parts of hardcore that really appealed to me, and I learned things from it that I carry with me all the time.
Yeah.
There was a lot of it that I never wanted anything to do with.
Right.
And I still don't.
Yeah.
I always took it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
I was never fully a card carrying member.
Yeah.
Even though I was probably at 2 shows a week, and a lot of my friends were in the bands and stuff like that. I always kind of was a little hesitant of a lot of, to get too into a lot of it.
Yeah.
So that's, I also had another band in high school. We played our first show with some of my Fall River friends.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I was at that time.
Do you remember the first show you saw?
Well, the first time I saw like an actual band was a band in Fall River called Cereal Toys that I ended up joining, and I was just at their practice in the basement.
Yeah.
And that was the first show I ever played.
Yeah.
When I first saw them, they were a 3-piece, and it was straight hardcore.
Yeah.
And excellent. I thought they were like the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
And by the time I joined, it was more like heavy alternative rock band.
Okay.
and we were terrible, but had every intention of being good.
Right.
And we played one big show at the high school in the auditorium. There were like 3,000. It was like some weird pseudo talent show. We did like our 3 songs.
Right.
But to put some perspective onto the city at the time, there were 30 acts on the bill. It was this all day thing.
Yeah.
We were the only band.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, was it all like
dance
jugglers
troops,
and dancers?
Rappers.
Yeah.
Rappers who dance, dancers who rapped.
Yeah.
I don't even know what else. But, you know, that's Fall River in a nutshell back then.
Yeah.
But that was also definitely a turning point where it's like, all right, I'm going to band practice. Like we're having practice and even to do stuff on a complete level of failure. But it requires like, okay, we need to play together. We need to write a song. We need to have practice. We need to pick a band name, etc. Like that is still good to do, even if it goes nowhere.
Right.
Because it lays the groundwork later on.
Right.
And I had also another important part of this is I'd been playing piano my whole life at this point.
Okay.
Which also at the same time once I got into high school, I had lost interest in practicing or showing up for my lessons.
Right.
But from like 5 years old to like 13, I was playing, and that definitely would come to help me later on.
Yeah, yeah. And when you first started going to shows, did you feel that same sort of? I know you said you didn't really like.
Well, my first real show that I went to was Intent to Injure, or ITI,
right.
And it was at the Curfew Club in New Bedford, which was an all ages, alcohol-free, hole in the wall,
right?
And it was insane. It was the first like truly. It was the first real show I'd been to, like real bands who knew what they were doing, who had songs. It was the first hardcore I had ever seen in person, although I had heard a bunch on record at that point. And ITI, you know, Josh, he sings for American War Machine too.
Yeah.
He was in civil defense.
Yeah.
They were like at the time, like pretty scary. If you didn't know those guys, it was like super aggressive.
Yeah.
And they were just in between songs. They're, you know, like I won't repeat what they were saying, but they were calling out the crowd for being like cowards.
Right. Right.
You know.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Of course.
And really encouraging violence.
Yeah.
And it was super scary.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was a little kid. I probably weighed like 130 pounds.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was like exhilarating. It's like, whoa, like I'm on Acushnet Avenue, Bedford, at this weird sketch ball place in a room full of like people like beating the hell out of each other.
Yeah.
And the band is threatening to like kill the crowd if they don't step it up a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is just madness.
Yeah.
Madness.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I saw some of the guys who I skated with who were from Tiverton were at that show. And I was like, whoa, like those are guys I know from skating who somehow made it from Tiverton to New Bedford.
Right.
Like there's a network here.
Yeah.
Like these dots are connecting.
Right.
And those guys, it was Josh Peralt and his brother Ben. Josh would go on to play. They both play in Freedom Force.
Yeah.
Josh is in Rampage, and still, those guys I still consider super good friends of mine. I might see them once every 3 years these days, but from our connection, skateboarding and going to shows and having to sort of look out for each other at certain times. I carry a connection with those guys to this present day. So from my very first show, it was like there were parts in place that are still there today. And Jeremy Medeiros, who played in ITI, and may still when they play, I'm not even sure, they still occasionally do some shows. He's in my new band.
Oh, all right.
And I ended up, he played in a band called Third Age that I feel like I saw more third age shows than they played. Somehow. And Ryan Parker, their bass player, is also in my new band. In Third Age. So a lot of these these stories I'm telling, like from my early introductions to this stuff, those people are still very much a part of what I do now and stuff I work on now, which is kind of crazy to think about. I mean, it's going back 30 years in some cases.
Yeah, seems like a running theme with a lot of the people I talk to on this, and just our friends.
Yeah,
we have mutual friends and just people that touch the hardcore scene a little more than just going to shows for like a year and then it was a phase. Like people that sort of stayed in that and made friends. Yeah, those people are still there for, like you said, 30-something years later. And
what's funny about that, might not have been that show, but a later show that I went to at that same club. You know, so I'm at my high school and getting by, and one of my favorite bands was the Pixies. And the Pixies, the singer had grown up in Westport, which was like one town over. Right. He had moved around a lot, but had gone to Westport High and had been in Westport for a while. Right. And a lot of my friends in high school lived in Westport, and some of them remembered from when he lived in town, but they didn't really listen to the Pixies. Right. They were just like, oh, yeah, you like that band? Oh, I remember. You know, and I was like, oh man, I just love that band. Like Doolittle had just come out, and I was really into them. And then Bossa Nova came out, and they were already one of my favorite bands. Yeah. And eventually one day, one of my friends from Westport was like, oh, the singer's brother is transferring into our school, and he's going to be in our grade. We know him. He's this kid, Ian. Right. I was like, that's amazing. Yeah. So the way that our seats went is it went by last name in alphabetical order. Right. My last name being Grant. He has the same mom as Charles, but different dads. His last name was Heimbegner. Okay. So we ended up sitting right next to each other. Nice. And through his brother, he had been exposed to just an unbelievable wealth of experiences in music. Yeah, and I mean, just had, you know, hung out with David Bowie and gone seen. Yeah. So suddenly I had somebody who like knew this. Like, I could talk to. I had somebody to talk to, and they happened to sit next to me. Yeah. And so we became good friends. And so I remember going with him to one of those early crazy shows. Yeah. I don't even know how we would have gotten there. Right. But in any event, he was somebody, he came, I think, our junior year. So junior and senior year, I felt like it was like, you know, my ability to have people to talk to at school had like doubled by knowing him. Yeah. And so in any event, that was high school for me. Yeah.
And then you started doing more music after high school?
Yeah, I went away to I went to BU when I left high school, and immediately, you know, it was like this huge breath of fresh air. Going from living in Fall River and going to this private school to suddenly like going to BU, like basically right in Kenmore Square, you know, surrounded by amazing music shops and comic book stores and lots of people doing interesting things and were very open-minded to doing crazy new things and it was like it was totally overwhelming for me.
Was this 94, 95?
This is 93.
93, okay.
And I was 17, probably, although I was smart enough, I was still 17 and probably not mature enough to be handling the situation in the best way. Yeah. So I ended up falling in with some guys. We started a band called Merrick. Yeah. And it was like indie rock band. I was sort of already doing like the singy, screamy kind of back and forth thing. There was an older guy in our school named Tom who had played in the band Drunks with Guns. Oh yeah. And he had decided to go to college like a little later in life. He might have been like 25 or something, 23, but he seemed like significantly older than us. And he started booking these shows in the student union. And so suddenly we had a place to play. Yeah. Because we didn't have any vehicles. We didn't know what we were doing. Yeah, yeah. So we played our first show there. Oddly enough, our first show was the band Karate's first show.
Oh, really?
And
the drummer went to BU.
Yeah, there was some connection.
Yeah.
Our first show was together.
Yeah.
And so we did that for like a year and a half, wrote a bunch of songs. I really was struggling to write lyrics that I was happy with.
Yeah.
I had a lot of self-doubt about my abilities especially to write.
Yeah.
But I felt like I got a lot out of the way with that band.
Yeah.
However, at one point they basically were like, gave me my walking papers.
Yeah.
And it was but it was like a strange thing. Like people liked us.
Right.
And it seemed like people liked me as the singer for the band.
Right.
But indie rock, especially at that time, like having a singer wasn't necessarily the coolest thing.
Right.
Like most of the bands, it's like, oh, the bassist kind of mumbles.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's still sort of a thing.
Definitely. Yeah.
It's like if you had a singer,
yeah.
you know, I feel like people are thinking like, oh, like,
what, you can't play an
are
instrument?
you Led Zeppelin?
Right.
How nice. You have a lead singer.
Yeah, I know.
Is it Freddie Mercury singing for you? And meanwhile, everybody else in the band is thinking like, well, you know, I know words. I can just put a microphone in front of me and I'll say some things, and we don't need a singer.
Right.
So, so that was it for me for that band. My girlfriend at the time, she and I split up. My roommate at the time was moving away. I got hurt at work. I needed a hernia repair surgery, and I was going to be laid up for a while.
Yep.
And my dad, who had been progressively getting sick for a long, long time, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he was only 58. He was still working.
Wow.
And I was 18, going on 19, and my sister had gone away to college, so it was just my mom trying to deal with my dad at home. My mom was working.
Right.
My dad had to retire early with disability, but he was so young that the school was fighting it, like he was running a scam or something, which just made it all the worse.
Yeah, exactly.
He'd been very, very sick for a long time, and they were hesitant to call it what it was, just because it seemed so crazy that he would be that young.
Yeah.
So the writing was on the wall for me to move back home.
Right.
So I did that, and for a long time I was like, all right, what am I gonna do here? Like, I have no idea what I'm gonna do with my life.
Right.
You know, so I got a job at the local country club where my sister was working at in between semesters, just working in the kitchen. And I was alternating my schedule so that when my mom was at work, I was home with my dad. My mom would come home and I would go to work.
Right.
So that somebody could be there with him, because he was a big guy who kept himself in really good physical shape, and suddenly his mental health was gone.
Right.
You know, no longer knew who I was, no longer knew where he was, accusing us of stealing things, informing us he'd called the police.
Right.
Just, it had been getting strange and awful for a long time.
Yeah.
But now it was like, this is sort of a crisis.
Yeah.
So that was going on, and I was like, all right, I need to find a band.
Yeah.
I need a band.
An outlet.
Now it's kind of like, I was in bands, but now I need a band. This is what I'm supposed to be doing right now. But all my old friends had also moved away. Right. You know, I moved away when I was 17. I came back when I was 19, and all my other friends had gone through similar, gone off. Right. You know, and I had left when it was 93, and I came back and it was 95, and a lot of music had changed at that point. So the shows that I was going to that were hardcore shows, one of the things I loved about it was that it was never looked upon or intended to be minor leagues for something else. Right. It was, you know, your goal was to write the best songs you could, put on the best show you could, record the best record you could, and that was it. Yeah. And beyond that, it was to be better at those things.
Yeah.
And all of my favorite bands had never quit their day jobs.
Right.
Not like the guys who were legends to me
Yeah.
had all punched a clock somewhere and then done their important thing in life,
Right.
which were these bands.
Right.
You know, like I don't think Bad Brains were ever able to not work
Right.
for long periods of time.
Yeah.
They always had to like have jobs.
Right.
Those guys are absolute legends to me.
Right.
And so for me, one of the biggest appeals of hardcore and underground music was like, it was accessible. It was
Right.
an attainable thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a folk art
Right.
type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is music that we make in our communities.
Yeah.
We are very good at it. It represents us. No one from outside of this community would do it quite like we do it.
Right.
And we are on the highest level of quality and performance that you could ever want from anything.
Yeah.
And because our goal is not career oriented with this, it allows a certain uninhibited creativity.
Yeah.
So I loved all of that.
Yeah.
You know, it was like, you know, there were big bands out there, you know, like U2 and INXS, but that wasn't an accessible thing.
Right.
How do you become Aerosmith?
Right.
I mean, there's no way, there's no path to that.
Right.
And those guys aren't relatable to you, nor are they supposed to be.
Right.
They want to be as unrelatable to you as humanly possible.
Yeah.
And they'll go out of their way. You know, Ozzy would bite the head off a bat on stage
Right.
just to let you know
Right.
you're not like him.
Right.
You will never be like him.
Right.
Don't even bother trying.
Right.
So it didn't represent you.
Yeah.
It was something to look at and appreciate from the distance.
Right.
And it might blow your mind, and there's something to be said for that.
Right.
But it wasn't this other thing.
Yeah.
And the other thing was just so validating.
Yeah.
You know, and so I came back, and during that interim, I felt like, even though, you know, the grunge revolution or whatever had happened in like, 91, 92,
Right.
it took a while for the repercussions of that to filter its way back down.
Yeah.
So when I went back to shows and was going to whatever shows were around,
Right.
first of all, there were more, they were less sounding like hardcore shows and more
Right.
like the sort of alternative rock,
Yeah.
indie rock stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a sense that this was a minor league situation.
Yeah.
There was a sense that people were biding their time doing this,
Yeah.
waiting for
A deal. or
yeah,
whatever.
waiting for the phone to ring or
Right.
something.
Yeah.
And everything was suffering because
Yeah.
of that. Everything was
Oh, yeah.
suffering because
Definitely.
of that. And I wanted a band, and I was just very frustrated. And I didn't know what I was doing with my life, and all my friends were gone. So
Yeah.
I was trying to piece together a network of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I was hanging out at this coffee shop for a while and asking around if anyone knew of anybody that I could
Right.
start a band with. And this dude's like, yeah, there's this metal band looking for a singer.
Mm-hmm.
They've been looking for a singer for a long time. Here's the kid's name. His name is Craig. Call him and ask him.
Right.
Tell him you know of him through me.
Right.
And I'm sure he'll let you come down and try it out.
Right.
So I called, and it was Craig Fleming, and he says, oh yeah, sure, come on down, give it a shot. We practice at the Wamsutta Mills,
Right.
top floor. We'll be there, you know, Saturday at 3.
Right.
Just walk up, you'll hear us, and
Yeah.
just walk in.
Right,
I'm
right.
like, all right, cool. What do I get to lose?
Right.
So I go to this mill. You got to walk up to the top floor of the mill, up the fire escape, which is
Yeah.
like barely connected to the building.
Right.
Walk all the way up. I open the door, and I can hear the band. So I find the door to the space. I walk in, and they're mid-song.
Mm-hmm.
So they look at me, I look at them, and I just kind of sit down, and I'm listening to it, and I'm like, this is like terrible.
Yeah.
It's not going to work.
Right.
And now I need to like gracefully remove myself
Right.
from the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So they go right from that song straight to another song.
Right.
And I'm like sitting there, and I'm like feeling like pretty down about everything. And
Right.
so finally there's like a break in the action, and I stood up and I was like, hey guys, I'm like, I'm sorry. This just isn't for me.
Right.
And I wish you guys luck, and it's cool. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not my thing.
Yeah.
and they're like, "Oh, who are you?" I was like, "What do you mean?"
Right.
I was the guy I was gonna sing.
Right.
They're like, "Oh, we're not looking for a singer." I was like, "Oh, is one of you guys Craig?" They're like,
Right.
"Oh, Craig Fleming?
Right.
Oh, that's 2 doors down." So I was at some random
just
band
some random
practice. I
sitting in there
told them I
watching.
didn't like him.
That's amazing.
So then I go to the right space. Yeah, and I go to the right space and I open the door, and I open the door to that space. Craig is there. I don't even know where to begin.
Yeah.
There's a coffin in the space with a sleeping bag in it. There's ammunition everywhere. Bullets, just loose bullets
Right.
all over the floor.
Yeah.
Guns everywhere.
Yeah.
There's a homemade recreation of one of the movie sets from Hellraiser, like that spinning like post with chains everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
There's I mean, it was craziness.
Right.
And Craig might have been wearing, he might have been like in full drag.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Right.
He was a lot. And he's like, "Oh, hey, glad you can make it."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh my God." So we have that practice. It was very like what they were doing at the time was thrash, sort of like, I don't know how to describe it. Thrashy, heavy, somewhat like Sepultura type stuff.
Yeah.
I taped some of the songs and I was like, all right, I'm going to go home and write to this.
Yeah.
I came back, I wrote to it. It was really heavy, way heavier. And I had no taste for metal at the time. I liked a handful of metal bands. I was a big Integrity fan.
Yeah.
I liked Slayer. I liked Sabbath.
Yeah.
All the corny, like the 3 or 4 metal bands that hardcore guys like, I liked.
Right.
And so I was not qualified to sing for them at all. Nor did I think I wanted to.
Right.
So I wrote some stuff, and eventually I said to them, "I'm sorry, I don't think I'm right for you guys."
Yeah.
And they were like, "Oh, why? What's the problem? We kind of liked what you were doing."
Right.
I was like, "Well, it's just a little too metal, etc."
Yeah.
I really am kind of looking for a hardcore band. So Craig was like, "Well, we love hardcore too."
Right.
Let me think about things. So he calls me back in a couple of weeks and he's like, we cut a couple of songs out of the set. We wrote some other songs. We'd like you to come back in.
Yeah.
And by that time, the wheels have been kind of turning in my head, and I'm thinking to myself, this, as much as this is not what I want to do, it might be what I need to do.
Right.
Like, this might be the perfect vehicle for what I want to do right now, which is to come out with guns blazing and play some of these shows and just like, I mean, really come out with guns blazing.
Yeah.
And I need something that maybe I don't like.
Right.
Like I maybe need something that's beyond what I would like, just so I can have this vehicle. Like I was just so I was really kind of angry at the other bands.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to make these bands feel bad.
Right.
I mean, I wanted to make people feel terrible.
Yeah.
And I thought this might be it.
Yeah.
Like maybe this is it.
Right.
And let's just make the grossest thing ever.
Right.
And so we did, and it went better than I expected.
Yeah.
Like immediately people were like, "You guys are just awesome."
Yeah.
And I don't mean to say that like we were awesome, because we weren't. But it would seem like what I was trying to do was resonating on some level.
Yeah.
And it was not a hardcore scene at all.
Yeah.
It was like, you know that the Fugazi documentary. You know, at that one point, like grunge happens. Fan base changes.
Yeah.
It was like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we started having these all ages shows, and it was like we were playing these halls and just packing them.
Yeah.
With a bunch of other local bands too. But it would be like 350 kids packed in a hall just going nuts.
Yeah.
And I remember our first run of shirts we had like 50 shirts and just sold out of them before we even went on. It was like, this is awesome.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
is this Gaskill?
This is Gaskill.
Yeah, right.
So then one thing leads to another, and the city starts cracking down on all ages shows, and we had to start playing bars.
Yeah.
And there weren't really any bars that were letting original bands play.
Right.
So, we started playing at the New Wave, which had cover bands all the time. And they were like, well, you guys can play, but you'll have to, you got to play for 3 hours.
Right.
And it was like, damn. All right. So we would do we'd be like, all right, how about if we do an hour set and a 45-minute break and another hour set.
Right.
And we just learned a bunch of covers and just started writing and writing and writing.
Yeah.
And the band changed over time, just changed its sound, and we got better. And more original bands started playing at the club, and the club sort of began to reinvent itself.
Yeah.
Like when we were playing there, it was just no stage and a PA. It was like playing like PA's Lounge or something.
Right. Yeah,
the chopping block. And then suddenly I think the club was like, this is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And they were a Portuguese restaurant / fisherman bar.
Yeah.
In really in the hood.
Right.
Like in the waterfront industrial area of New Bedford. And suddenly they slowly transformed into this rock club.
Yeah.
Very slowly, incrementally.
Yeah. And
the guys running sound there were Tom and Ron Poitras, who had played in a band called the Glue-Ons in the early 80s. And were very extremely hip, knowledgeable guys.
Yeah.
And would on their own, through their own volition, spin amazing music in between bands. And they were running an open mic there.
Right.
Like they were already there. But they needed fuel.
Yeah.
And so that stuff started happening, and then they began to let us book our own shows.
Right.
And so then word got out that we were a place that Boston bands could play or Providence bands could play, and things just really started snowballing quickly. And then they started giving me nights I could book there and asking me to fill in booking nights and stuff. And these great bands were coming into play.
Right.
Like Season to Risk played there.
Oh, really?
Stuff. Random weird stuff.
Yeah.
And
Holy Cow played a bunch down there.
Well,
right?
Holy Cow were local.
They were the
the singer for Holy Cow was the brother of the singer for the Glue-Ons, who were the sound guys there. And the singer for the Glue-Ons ended up becoming the bassist for Holy Cow when they reformed.
Okay.
And it was those guys were all very much still a part of the music scene and started playing again at the New Wave all the time.
Oh, okay.
And became very close friends with us. We all used to play together.
Yeah.
Very different styles of music in some ways. Yeah. But Chris and I, as frontmen, are maybe not so different.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to ask you some of your influences as a frontman. Yeah. I would think of him.
When I first saw him, I was like, where the hell has this guy been?
Yeah.
Like, he's been around. I didn't know about this guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Or like Jet from Sam Black Church.
Yeah, which I became of him
later.
Much later, yeah. But so that whole scene took off. We had a Wilhelm Scream down there.
Oh, yeah.
And then Beyond the Embrace metal band.
Yep.
And then Holy Cow and us. And I was bringing in a lot of bands that I liked from Boston and Providence and trying to use my ability to book shows there at trade shows. So it would get us out of town, etc. The sound system ended up becoming, in my opinion, one of the best sound systems in New England.
Yeah.
And people appreciated that. Yeah. The club paid the bands very well, especially compared to Boston.
Yeah.
Now that they're closed, I don't feel as guarded about talking about it. Right. But we played shows. The capacity of the club was 90 people.
Right.
We'd have 350 people paid at the door, and they would hand us like thousands to pay the bands with, and everybody ate and drank for free.
Yeah, yeah.
And then at the end of the night, and it was like part of the reason the club doesn't exist anymore is they were willing to push the boundaries regarding what's necessarily legal.
Right.
So there were perks to playing there that were hard to wrap your head around sometimes. And we had just so much fun. It was just an insane time. And really, I mean, I can't even explain it. Just a packed house of people going bonkers. Bonkers. And this would happen like all the time.
It got a reputation. Like,
it was awesome. It was really cool, and it's sorely missed. I mean, it's been gone for a while now. It's has never been replaced. But so in any event, time went by, and we were becoming like a proggier and proggier band. We recorded an album with Keith Souza, who owns Machines with Magnets studio / performance space, and had been a friend of mine from. He played in a band called Rays back in the day, and I had known him forever. Like, he was very much part of that same scene of guys. So we recorded an album with him. He hadn't built Machines with Magnets yet. He still had a studio in his parents' house in Tiverton, but he was coming into his own with recording. And we were coming into our own as a band. Everything before that, I don't even really count. That was like our first batch of songs that was like, all right, I can like we can stand behind this now. And we were playing a lot with Medea Connection in Boston, which is, for most of the time, it was Dan and Tanya as a two-piece. Eventually, they had a bassist, and eventually James, Dan's brother, became the bassist. At one point in time, our drummer abruptly quit the band. We found out from other people. We were at a show that we were playing. And other people were like, "Oh, I heard it's your last show." Like, no. They're like, "No, it is. It's your last show." I'm like, "Oh, really?" "Yeah, that's it. Your drummer's..." And we had other shows booked. We had a whole album's worth of material written, and he didn't. We hadn't done anything to warrant that. It was just like, I'm going to do this because I can, and it'll be funny or something. So he did that. And our songs at that point, most of them were like over 8 minutes. 12 or 13 parts in every song. Our drummer was writing a lot of the guitar and bass parts. Like, I was writing all the vocals and lyrics, but sometimes he would just demo the whole thing, teach it to the other guys, and I would write vocals. So when he left without warning, and we hadn't even demoed that stuff, that was it. We were just done. So it was crushing. I was really depressed about it, and I had said to myself, at one point, if there was anybody I could work with right now, who would it be? Like, locally, who I know. And I was like, well, I wish I could sing from Medea Connection. But they have a singer, it's Dan. And they're a family unit, so that's ridiculous. So that'll never happen. And literally, like 2 days later, my phone rings, and it's Dan from Medea Connection. He's like, "Yeah, we're thinking of like scrapping the band and starting a new band, and we'd like you to sing."
That's a pretty good Dan Brockman, by the way.
And and we'd like Mario to maybe play bass, and James will move to second guitar. We think it'll be great. And I was like, done. Let's do it. You know what I mean? And that band, that's when things like really... That band was in a weird situation that, in retrospect, and I'll talk about that a bit, but that band seemed like, for quite a while, most of the time, it was like we could do no wrong. It was like surreal.
And this is the hidden we're talking about.
And so, we hadn't played any shows yet, and things were already happening. It was just like the stars had like sort of aligned or something, and people were just really excited about this before it even happened, and like way more maybe than they should have been on paper. And we were writing really well right off the bat, and my lyrics were suddenly where like they made a jump. Like Gaskill ended, and a few months later I was in the hidden, and I was writing better. And I never went. It became. I wasn't struggling. It was like I'm suddenly a better writer. And we just were like clicking, and it was firing. And it just, things happened really quickly. Jonah Jenkins was doing Tractor 7, and at the same time, we'd gone to see Shellac in Portsmouth, and they did their thing where they sell their own merch off the stage at the end of the show.
Yep.
And I had probably had like 17 beers, and I asked Steve how far out he was booked.
Right.
He's like, oh, not too bad.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, you should come make a record.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and so we started looking at like the feasibility of doing that, and it's like, all right, this is kind of affordable.
Yeah.
Let's go do this. And we had 7 songs as a band. We had played 2 or 3 shows.
Yeah.
And we booked time in Chicago, and like, let's just go make a record.
Yeah.
So we did, and that was just an unbelievable experience.
Yeah. What was that like working with?
Well, to backtrack a little bit, like I had talked about, how much I like the Pixies,
right?
And obviously the production on Surfer Rosa was kind of the thing, that kind of woke people up to him as a producer, or an engineer, and because it has all those trademark things. It's like that minimalist, super dynamic in levels, and the big massive drum sound. Just bare bones and just like, real clobbering. And I remember hearing that record, and then also hearing Big Black on the radio. Yeah. And there might have been something else, 2 or 3 other things I had heard that he recorded.
Right.
And in my head, I said to myself, and I remember exactly where I was. I was in class one day thinking to myself, and I just said, I'm gonna make records someday. This guy's gonna record some records that I'm gonna make. And I never worked towards that. Outside of seeing Shellac and just saying, hey, like, is it even possible we can go record with you? Yeah. And the not so big secret is that he records nobody bands all the time. Right. You know, he's probably recording one right now. Right. You know, and it's not very expensive as long as you don't mind getting out to Chicago to do it. That said, we ended up doing 3 records with him. Yeah. And he is extremely friendly and welcoming. You know, he lives in the studio downstairs. Yeah. So it's kind of like you're in an extension of his house. Right. And extremely friendly, funny, warm guy. Great conversation. Has a manner of keeping everyone calm. Right. Because it's really high stress. Yeah, of course. You know, you don't want to blow it. You're out there for like 3 days or whatever, trying to really nail this thing. Yeah. So and you've just driven like 19 hours. Yeah. He has a real way of getting people to just stay calm and like focused on the task. At the same time, he logged really long hours. Yeah. You're not paying by the hour; you pay by the day. Okay. And he, our last album that we did, I think our last day was like a 21-hour day. Oh, really? And he was just kind of like, no, let's finish. Let's let this simmer. Right. We'll go make some coffee. Yeah. We'll shoot some pool for a little bit, and let's come back and see how it sounds. Right. And if we're all up for it, let's keep going. Yeah, your ears start to get fried. I remember the few times I've recorded, your ears get fried after like 8 hours. Oh yeah. And you know, he didn't have to do that. He could have been like, well, it's been 10 hours, guys, so you know, I'm gonna go watch Wheel of Fortune with my wife downstairs or whatever. Yeah. So I the only complaints that I have with those recordings would involve my own performance here and there. Yeah. Which would happen to me no matter where I was. Right. There are always times when I record where I think back to being in the mixing room and wanting to say something, and for whatever reason I don't say something, and it haunts me for years. Yeah, you hear it. I hear it forever. Yeah, exactly. and I always think I was right and I should have said it and I didn't say it. I knew it and I didn't say it. So like if I could only do my records there for the rest of my life, I would. But it would be hard. Logistically, it's hard. You know.
Have you been able to get past that in subsequent like recordings where speaking up with stuff that you think should?
No. And I think a lot of it's just imaginary too. I don't think a lot of that's based on reality. You know, I chose not to say something. The fact of the matter isn't that I wanted to say it and I was a coward. It's that I wanted to say it and I thought better of it. And now I'm second guessing that decision that I made, which at the time, if I had to do it all over again, I'd probably do the same thing.
Of course.
You know what I mean? It's just being a perfectionist and hating and you have so many opportunities to look at something that you did and convince yourself that you blew it. So the tendency is never to listen back and think like, oh yeah, we nailed it. You know what I mean? Like I will. It's rare that I ever listen to stuff that I recorded ever again. I'll listen to it a lot when we first finish it, and then I never want to hear it again because it doesn't. It sounds like music to other people. It doesn't sound like music to me. To me, it sounds like a lot of work and a lot of opportunities that were either seized or the ball was dropped. And I can't, you know what I mean? I have a hard time ever divorcing myself from that stuff. So we, you know, we made those records and there was a lot, like my thoughts about music were sort of developing at this time. I'd had a lot of ideas about music that I kept to myself, but just was like turning over in my head, like, you know, what is music? Like, why am I doing this? Why is it important? Why do I when I hear other people's music, why does it mean anything to me? Why do people even have it? Like how come there aren't groups of people who like don't have music somewhere? You know, why isn't it like meatballs are delicious? Lots of countries have meatballs. They don't all have meatballs though. They don't have to. Like, why isn't music like meatballs? You know what I mean? It's delicious if you have it, but you know, you know, they don't do that over there or whatever. You know. And so I had studied when I was in school. I had studied a lot of Buddhist stuff and a lot of comparative religious stuff. And I had grown up very religious, very like Irish Catholic upbringing. And the sort of ecstatic euphoria that you would see at like a hardcore show, it was like this thing that like just stuck in my head. And I was like, what is that? Like, what is that? What does it mean? And clearly other people are feeling it. The whole place is going bonkers. Like bonkers. Like you could lead these people right into speeding traffic. They're so frenzied. You know what I mean? There's something to be harnessed here. Like what are we doing? And so I started like thinking of these ideas that that this sort of, you know, music sort of is this religious experience, like a secular religious experience. And regardless of your culture or your religion or your lack of religion, it connects you to greater things. And the only thing that music has in common is rhythm. It always has rhythm. Even these cultures that supposedly have no music or have outlawed music, they'll often have like religious chanting that is very rhythmic and it's all based on rhythm. And so I'm like, okay, so we all have music. Every religion has music tied into it, and music is a form of prayer in every religion. There's clearly this like ecstatic, you know, ecstasy that people can fall into through this. So I started having this idea, like, music to me, I think, especially pop music in America, has sort of become this like proto-religion.
Right.
Like it's not a religion, but I think we're watching one form.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of what we do and how we deal with music is not necessarily on an artistic level. It's on a religious level.
Right.
Everything is very ritualized, and we like, when was the last time a sports celebrity died and their fans said they faked their own death, they're really still alive somewhere?
Right.
But that happens in rock and roll and rap music all the time.
Yeah.
Like, no one's saying Dale Earnhardt is
Right.
still alive.
Right.
He was sick of racing cars.
Right.
He faked his death. He's in Morocco right now,
Right. Yeah,
and he races camels in
Right.
the desert. But people will swear up and down that Jim Morrison's still alive.
Right.
That Elvis faked his death.
Right.
That Tupac is alive and making a record right now.
Right.
And the reason that we have that is because, just like in Buddhism and in Christianity, in many ways, rock and roll is looked at as this sort of like fertility death cult.
Right.
We want our musicians to be young,
Mm-hmm.
to die young, but also to never die.
Yeah.
And it's the sex death cult.
Right.
And that's a religion that's gone by many different names forever and ever.
Right.
Our people in rock and roll get resurrected,
Right.
and we make icons to them.
Yeah.
All over the South, you will see extremely. You'll see shrines to Elvis Presley all over the South.
Yeah.
Shrines to him, and people fall into these frenzied states at concerts. You know what I mean? And a lot of rock and roll and what we do in rock and roll is no longer based upon like artistic considerations. It's becoming ritualized things.
Right.
Like, you must have a guitar, a bass, a drummer, and a singer because that's the way we do our rock shows.
Right.
That's the way the ritual works.
Right.
There will be, there has to be a merch table. There has to be a guy, like everything about it. Like, none of these things have to be the way they are, but they're becoming very ritualized. Right. And it's because in order for people to like lose themselves the way they want to, it has to be wrapped up in something that they can understand at the beginning. That they're familiar with. Right. It has to be like, this is what I signed up for, and this is how I'm going to get myself to go where I need to go. And so then it's like, okay, why though? Like, why music? Why rock and roll? Well, because all the world is naturally filled with rhythms. Mm-hmm. It's like the sun goes up, comes down, it goes up, comes down. There's winter, summer, then winter, then summer, then winter. There's high tide, there's low tide. There's high tide, there's low tide. There's full moon, there's new moon. There's full moon, there's new moon. And if you are sensitive to rhythm, you can recognize those patterns and anticipate how they're going to unfold and anticipate when they're going to change. Right. And if you can do those things, it allows you to survive. You know when to plant things. You know when to go hunt things. You know when to build. You know when to hide. You know when to do things. Yeah. So on one level, when we hear music, we're practicing all those survival skills. Right. Here's a rhythm. Mm-hmm. I'm able to recognize it. It's catchy to me. Yeah. I can anticipate what it's going to do. If it does something unexpected, there's a thrill and a kind of conflict there. But then I know to look for that later on, that change, Mm-hmm. But beyond that, on a deeper level, it's almost like by creating our own little patterns of rhythm, we're creating like a miniature model of all the stuff that we see outside. Right. And we're saying to ourselves, not only do I recognize like the world and my place in it, but I can recreate it in tiny scale levels. Right. Because it's something that I love. Right. Like this is a labor of love for me. Right. Because these patterns that I am also a part of, I love and I appreciate and I understand enough to do a crude model of it. Right. And other people, when they see my model, they will see everything else in that model, and they'll recognize it too. Yeah. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so these are things that we can do that connect us to everything around us and make the world a little less scary, because like there's patterns. You can recognize them. You can see it. And out there, all those things are like that too. So it gives us this like empowerment. It makes us feel like more connected with our world and our place in it.
Right.
And so it's natural that in a place like America, where people are coming with radically different cultural baggage, that would be a common ground. Like it knocks it right back down to square one, that rhythm.
That's very basic.
That's heartbeat, that's breathing, that's the tides, it's everything. And I think right now, like I don't think it is a religion, but I think that if you were able to go back in time, that most religions didn't think they were religions when they started, and probably looked a lot like the last 100 years of pop music in America. Yeah. And anyway, that long tangent I just went on is because that's been a driving force in me for writing and for what I'm trying to do. As far back as when I did Gaskill, and I was like, I need a machine to show people what I think this means. You know what I mean? And that you shouldn't be wasting your time up there, because you might not think this is important. You might not want to take this seriously, but that doesn't mean that it's not important and it's not serious. Yeah. And it's not, you're not capable, you know, there's a potential to tap into some big stuff. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's been a guiding course in my lyrics and in what I try to do on stage and why I'm making music.
Yeah.
I think it was always why I was making music.
Yeah.
And I frankly think it's why many people are making music.
Yeah.
But it took me a lot of time thinking about it, and I could be like a really delusional person, but that's sort of where I am. Yeah. And I think in many ways, growing up with my parents who are deep believers in the church, and I was taught to be a deep believer in the church, and you know, at the same time, my dad with his like military background and stuff like that, in a way, music became a fusion of religion and I don't know the word I'm looking for.
Right.
You know, it's like it's a vocational thing. You know, it's like you have to do this.
Right.
You just have to do this, which can make it hard. These are hard things to explain to people.
Right. Yeah.
I'm at the point now where I don't try to volunteer at my day jobs that I do this sort of thing anymore, because people don't get it, nor would I ever expect them to.
Right.
Yeah, I had a funny moment. This is when the Hidden was like really like just firing on all cylinders.
Right.
And that reminds me of something else I wanted to come back to. But I was working my day job, right, and there was like this older rocker dude. He was like an older hair metal guy, retired hair metal guy. Yeah. And he thought it was cool, like I was playing music, you know. And one day he comes to me, he's like, "Hey, I'm gonna ask you something. How long has your band been together?"
Right.
I was like, "Oh, like 3 years."
Right.
He's like, "How old are you?" So I'm 30.
Yes.
Man, I gotta tell you, I think you should probably get rid of that band and start another one. I was like, "Really?
Yeah.
Why is that?" He's like, "Oh man, if it hasn't happened with that band yet, it's probably not going to happen, man. 3 years.
Yeah.
You better find some new people."
Right.
I mean, they're just not going to do it for you.
Yeah.
And so, like, to try to explain.
Yeah, people that.
It's embarrassing for everybody.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I know.
It's like, you know, or they either think that like you're like you want to be Van Halen,
right,
or almost more insulting, they think that, you want to play Smoke on the Water on the weekends.
Right. Yeah.
And it's
right.
I can't even explain this to you.
Yeah.
I can't explain this to you.
Yeah, and it's hard to. There was always a period when I remember, like at family events, where you had to find the point in music where someone would be able to relate to.
The common ground.
Yeah, so you could start with like Nirvana. You know, if you're trying to get to a band that maybe sounds like, I don't know, the Pixies. You have to be like, well, you've heard this band, and then they go, well, I don't know, and then you'd go, well, what about Jane's Addiction, or whatever. And so it is always in. I have a couple of people at work that will listen to this podcast sometimes and have no clue what, they're like, yeah, it's good, but I have no idea what any of you guys are talking about. And I love that because it's like our thing, underground music, and just that whole.
Yeah, it is.
You feel protective of it, but you also kind of want to tell, brag about it a little too.
It's definitely an acquired taste, all of this stuff, and it's what people sometimes get wrong is that they think it should be for everybody sometimes, and it really shouldn't be.
Yeah,
like it's not for everybody.
Right.
The same way that like chess isn't for everybody.
Right.
Or I don't know, like highlight isn't for everybody.
Yeah.
Why should it be for everybody?
Yeah.
It's a weird thing. Like you kind of have to invest some time. Some of these bands that I really like, it took me a long time putting in the work to like these bands.
Yeah.
I didn't like them for a long time.
Yeah.
But I knew that from where they were coming from and the people who recommended them to me, that there was something, like I hadn't put the work in.
Right.
Like there are bands, it's like books. There are some books out there that are very challenging and difficult to read.
Yeah.
They're not, and that's not a failure of the book.
Right.
It means you got to put the work in.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a failure of Mount Washington that Mount Washington is hard to climb.
Right.
Like, you got to put the work in, and there's music like that,
Who are some of the artists that you took a while to?
Joy Division.
Yeah.
When I was, I was probably like, I don't know, 13 or so.
Yeah.
And I thought they were just awful.
Right.
Terrible.
Yeah.
I'm like, they can't sing. You can't sing.
Yeah.
The music just sounded like beyond amateurish. Like these guys are really not good.
Mm-hmm.
And just tuneless.
Right.
And then suddenly one day it clicked to the extent that I almost listened exclusively to them for maybe 8 months.
Right.
It clicked on that level.
Yeah.
And once it clicked, it was never going to unclick.
Right.
But I could easily understand anyone hearing Joy Division and saying, yeah, you gotta be kidding me.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then some other stuff like, you ever heard like Con 8?
No.
Or like Gnaw?
Oh, yeah.
It's just like the really slow, like...
Oh, KHA.
Yeah. It's the same singer for both of those bands. Right. And I love that stuff.
Yeah.
But it is hard to listen to.
Yeah. I feel like
I
that with...
love them, and it's hard to listen to it. You know what I mean?
I feel like that with I Hate God is like that. I love them, but...
Yeah, it's not supposed to be easy for you. It's not... They're not going to cut up the food on your plate for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you like this is not like you have to put work in.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be, they're doing something that's difficult and challenging, and you don't have to listen.
Right.
But if you're gonna listen, you've got to put the work in, or it'll never work for you. So it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's and I don't expect it to be.
Right.
And that, I think that, when I started making music, it was in the quote unquote good old days of the music industry where there were a lot of labels and supposedly bands were making money.
Right.
And now supposedly everything's gone to hell, et cetera, et cetera. I personally feel the exact opposite is true.
Yeah.
None of my peers were making any money in the good old days.
Yeah.
A lot of us, myself included, if you had to make an album back then, like you either had to make like 2,000 CDs or zero.
Yeah.
It didn't matter if you were going to sell them at a snail's pace.
Right. Yeah.
Now, because the bottom dropped out of that market, and the technology got so cheap, the CD duplication places will bang them out 50 at a pop.
Yeah.
And you can, they didn't have to take your business back then.
Yeah.
They weren't going to be bothered setting up their machines for your crap.
I know.
Now they will.
Yeah.
So if you are aware of what it means to work to scale,
Right.
None of my projects has lost money on a release since the record industry supposedly collapsed.
Right.
They usually make their money back within like 2 or 3 days of being out, because the overhead is so low now.
Yeah, at this point.
And I'm not dumb enough to run off thousands and thousands of copies.
Yeah.
I'll make 100, 200, 300 out of pop, and then if I got to make more, I'll make more.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's like the best time.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like it's the best time ever in the history of music to be a musician right now.
Yeah.
I can distribute my stuff for free all over the world.
Yeah.
I can distribute myself for cash all over the world.
Yeah. You promote yourself for free.
I can
with
record
social media
very cheaply. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's such a good time.
Definitely. Yeah.
It's such a good time.
Yeah.
And
you said there was a story you were going to go back to on the hidden. I don't remember what we were saying.
oh yeah. So the hidden ended.
Yeah.
Okay. It ended. There were parts of our lives that were making it harder and harder to even get together for anything.
Right.
I lived in Lowell.
Right.
Mario lived in New Bedford.
Mm-hmm.
I relied on public transportation to go everywhere because
Right.
I was like out of my mind.
Yeah.
I didn't have a car. I didn't want one. Dan and Tanya Dan lived in Boston.
Right.
His wife, Tanya, our drummer,
Yeah.
had decided to go back to school
Oh, right.
in Ithaca at
Yeah.
Cornell.
Yeah. I remember that.
So she would come home and play drums for us,
Yeah.
which meant that we'd have to get her back up to speed.
Right.
It also meant we couldn't write while she was away, which she was in school full time.
Right.
So in the meantime, we had other people play drums for us, which required getting them up to speed with our
Right.
set. Or Dan would play drums and we'd
Right.
have one guitar, which also meant we weren't really like firing.
Right.
So for the last 2 years we were together, we didn't write a single new song.
Yeah.
That in itself was just bad.
Yeah.
And then it got to the point where like even that dynamic was just sort of like there was no communication.
Right.
There was a show that was booked that Mario and I didn't like know about.
Right.
And we got a call from the rest of the band. We're out in Western Mass. Like, where are you guys?
Right.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. Right.
So that was the end of that.
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, that's fine.
Right.
I'm kind of like, this is the time for this to stop.
Yeah.
And we'll take the momentum that we have
Yeah.
and just parlay it into something new.
Yeah.
So my friend Alex had been in Beyond the Embrace, and they had just broken up, and they were like a metal blade band and
Right.
touring all over the place.
yeah,
and
yeah.
I'm like, those guys in the metal scene, which is like a total different universe from me,
Right.
they had a lot of momentum. Alex and I had always talked about doing something.
Yeah.
Alex and I will start a band. We'll bring in Mario on bass from the Hidden and Gaskill. And then Craig Fleming from Gaskill
Right.
said, I want to play music again. He jumped in. We got a drummer. And I'm like, this is going to be sick. People
Right.
are going to, people won't even hear us and they're going to be interested.
Right.
Nothing could have been further from the truth. Nobody cared.
Yeah. What was
Nobody
this band
cared.
called?
Iron Oak.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it was like suddenly no one even, like I couldn't get the time of day.
Right.
Like I couldn't get a show.
Yeah.
Nothing. And now granted, like we weren't the best band,
Right.
but I still thought like the time that we've invested
Right.
shouldn't all be lost to
Yeah.
move on to a new project.
Right.
And yet suddenly, whereas the Hidden could do no wrong,
Right.
it was like, Iron Oak couldn't get a parking ticket
Right.
in Boston,
Yeah.
and that also, as time went on, I was like, and I would see other bands too. Like I would see other bands where I'm like, that band is phenomenal.
Right.
Phenomenal. Nobody cares.
Right.
Nobody cares.
Yeah.
They'll make an amazing record. Nobody's going to care.
Right.
And they're not doing anything wrong.
Right.
They're doing everything
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Nobody cares. And then there would be another band that's huge buzz about them. They
Right.
would play, and I'm like, and everybody's there, and everybody's going crazy, and I'm like, that band's not good.
Right. Yeah.
They're not good.
Yeah.
And it's not that they're not my cup of tea. They're
Yeah, it's
not,
just
good.
Right.
And that also, although I had already had these thoughts about, sort of the ritual of things, I'm like, clearly it's because that's irrelevant.
Right.
That's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Like music, and especially rock and roll and pop music in the context of what I was talking about, is not a meritocracy.
Right.
You're going to fill the needs of people on some deeper level, or you're not. And it has nothing. The music might not even be a factor at all,
Right.
frankly.
Yeah.
It might have nothing to do with it.
Right.
It could be the right time, the right place,
Mm-hmm.
the way someone was standing that day,
Right.
the way the wind blew,
Yeah.
whatever it was.
Right.
And I had been the benefactor of that in the
Right.
hidden.
Yeah.
Because although we were a good band, it felt like we could do no wrong, and
Right.
opportunities often fell into our laps.
Yeah.
I was very grateful for them.
Right.
But in retrospect, were they all like earned?
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't think so.
Yeah.
And then I was in a band where it was like, okay, we were a deeply flawed band. There was way too much partying going on in that band.
Right.
However, there was some really good players,
Yeah.
some good songwriting going on, and we were established musicians.
Yeah.
Nobody cared.
Right.
And so then I had been on both sides of it.
Yeah.
And knowing that now is also somewhat liberating.
Yeah.
Because as much as not being in it for careerist reasons
Right.
is liberating, so is the fact that you shouldn't measure your success by the response you get or don't get, because you're doing these things for different reasons, and you shouldn't lose the plot.
Yeah, of course.
Keep your head on
Yeah.
why are you doing this
Right.
again? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was a good experience,
Yeah.
even though it was a terrible
Right.
experience.
It was frustrating too for you because you put a lot into writing lyrics.
Yeah.
And then to not have them
Yeah.
at least spread out there.
Yeah, it
Must-
is. You know what I mean? And that can be really tough, except for the fact that
You put
that wouldn't mean that you would write terrible
right.
stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You put the same energy into it
you
that you
have
put
to.
into
and it's not your fault.
Right.
You know what I mean? It is what it is.
right.
And I've also been in the same social circle, I'll say, at times in my life, with bands that very much enjoyed the hustle.
Right.
And it was like they like to know the right people.
Right.
They want to tour constantly.
Right.
And that's how they measured whether or not they were a real band or not.
Right. Yeah.
And for them, the music and what they were saying,
yeah.
that was barely in the
Right.
equation.
Yeah.
This one band that I will go nameless, but let's say they're a hypothetical band.
Mm-hmm.
They recorded an album.
Right.
The lineup had changed so much, there was only one member from
Right.
that album that they recorded.
Yeah.
They hadn't written any new material, and were touring constantly,
Right.
year round to promote this one album
Right.
that every place they were touring to had already bought this album.
Right.
But for them, it was like, that's our validation as being on the road.
Right.
And if that's what you want, God
Right.
bless you, but it's nothing to do with
Right.
what I want to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I never wanted to play music so that I could be a traveling salesman.
Right. Yeah.
And I want to make something the best that I can, and if somebody else wants to sell it, go right ahead.
Right.
I want to make things, and I'm not into it like I was never someday I'm gonna have a band,
Right.
and I'm gonna email clubs, and it's gonna be, I'm gonna just harass clubs to let me play. I'm gonna
Yeah,
sleep
that's
on
the
strangers' couches, and it's
Right.
gonna be great.
Yeah. Play Tuesday night in the middle of January. And
Yeah, and it's never been why I want to do anything.
right.
So Iron Oak was done. And at the same time I was doing Iron Oak, that was like my like bad mojo band.
Right.
Heavy partying going on to the point where we were never going to be able to get a real record together.
Yeah,
It was like bad news. And the band blew apart for that. And luckily everybody was okay after some years. I had a good energy band at the same time called the Judo Airs, which was some guys that I had known from playing hardcore and going to hardcore shows for a long time. And it was like positive, melodic, very DC sounding. You know, like Embrace, Dag Nasty, Rites of Spring type stuff. But it's funny because as much as I always listened to that and went to those shows, back in the day, like no one would ever ask me to sing for a band like that. But now they wanted me to, and it was great because for me, like that was in many ways, a lot closer to what I grew up listening to than any of my other bands had been. So I had this like negative energy band at the same time I had this positive energy band. That band, a couple of the guys. You know, it's tough because we're not kids, and when you're an older guy who's like a straight edge guy, eventually like playing in bars is probably not gonna drive me up the wall. Especially if there are guys in the bands who like being in bars, so you know, it was another situation where a couple of guys just kind of walked without any notice, and it left us high and dry, and we're all doing other things. So I, at that point, I had been reading, it was the Miles Davis autobiography.
Oh, just the one called Miles. Yeah, that's amazing.
Unhinged. And I kind of liked you know, the jazz guys, it's like they don't think of bands. They're just like, oh, I'm going to play with this group of dudes. And like they'll put out a record and it'll just be like, you know, live at the such and such club. And whoever's on the record was whoever they were playing with like that month or whatever. And they would just call people up and be like, like come play drums with me. The piano player is some guy you've never met, but he's good. Don't worry about it. You guys will be fine. And I was like, you know, nobody makes bands like that. It's always like friends. And I'm like, I want to make a band like that. I want to have a band of basses. And I'm just going to call up all my favorite bass players that I know. And I know the dude who I want to play drums. And most of these guys don't know each other. And we're going to have a band. And so that was Black House. A lot of people told me it wasn't going to work. That it was just going to sound like hell. But the bassist that I asked with their tone in mind, like thinking it would work. And it worked great. It was probably the most like interesting band. It was like everything that I kind of hoped it would be. The guys really clicked and everything, but it was a combination of one guy having health issues and had to take a significant break off of practice and playing to deal with that, combined with you know, Tim was really busy with White Dynamite and Rosa off and on. And then when finally the stars of the line to get back together, we had one practice and then lost our practice space. They threw all the bands out of the mill, and it was like, all right, guys, this is done. You know? So at that point, what did I do at that point? Oh, Gaskill again.
You guys.
So I was like, I had kept trying to put together very heavy bands, and then one day I was like, I keep trying to basically put Gaskill back together, but I don't want to say that's what I'm doing. Why? And that's what Iron Oak really was. So why don't I just do that? And our drummer who had left had moved to Japan years ago, right after he left, pretty much. And so I had a drummer in mind. We asked him, he said yes. He showed up he had written out sheet music for all of our songs on drums and at a stand and played them perfect. First run, every single song. And it was like, that was it. It's done. Yeah. So we made a record with him. It came out really great. Just as heavy as we ever were.
Yeah.
We were better musicians at that point because we were older.
Yeah.
Then we did this idea was floated around for a night where original bands would, what was the theme of this? I think it was original bands would play an album or somebody else's album.
Right.
So we learned on the My War album.
Right.
And we brought in a second guitarist who could handle all the leads.
Yeah.
And our friend Brian Cass, who had played the same show, he had a studio and was like, why don't you guys come record that while it's all fresh, and we'll work out the payment later. Right. So we recorded it. Yeah. And I was really, really happy with that.
Yeah.
So we recorded basically our first comeback album and we called it Our War.
Right.
Simultaneously.
Yeah.
And then that drummer moved away. We replaced him with another drummer and wrote and recorded an EP. Mm-hmm. And started getting a lot more Boston shows, which our first run around, we never played Boston very much, just a handful of times.
Right.
But our drummer at that point always needed like extended times off. He was in school and working.
Yeah.
And I've always been like, I'd rather take 6 months off than break up a band.
Yeah.
But it got to the point where he just couldn't anymore. Right. So we've been on hiatus since around Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
In theory, we will be getting back together again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not super worried about it. I kind of look at bands like, it's like you might be a car guy and have a bunch of cars,
right? But
you probably only have one or two of them on the road,
right?
Like registered and insured. That doesn't mean that the other ones you couldn't put back on the road.
Yeah, right.
So that's how I've always looked at it. I've always thought it was really weird when bands like break up.
Right, right.
Like that's almost never happened to me. Like an official announcement.
Right.
Our show. This will be our final show.
Yeah.
Due to like we cannot continue with each other. It's like weird to me.
Yeah. I don't think Fugazi never officially did. And I don't think the Police ever. That was another one.
I mean, I can understand why you might want to, but it would have to be something awful. And luckily, that's never happened to me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are bands where it's highly unlikely we'll ever work together again.
Yeah.
But just because of logistics, not because you ruined my life or something crazy.
Yeah.
So then I also had a band back in the Gaskill days called Exposed Human Sharks.
Yeah.
That I did at the same time as Gaskill.
Right.
I had been trying to get Tom Poitras, who had been in the Glue-Ons and was one of the sound guys at the New Wave.
Right.
I kept telling him to form a punk band.
Yeah.
Like, dude, you got to come back out of like punk retirement.
Right.
He's like, and like Tom's like kind of like almost like a hippie type guy.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I'll do it if you sing. Yeah. And I'm like, all right, Tom, let's do it. And it became like this, like it's a weird sound. Very, very cool. Mm-hmm. Again, one of the more interesting bands.
Yeah.
Very somewhat like Middle Eastern sounding. A little Pixies-esque at times. We write really quickly together, but we never had a set lineup for our backing band.
Right.
I always had Gaskill at the time. Tom was having like babies at the time.
Right.
And so it kind of went to pieces, and we never did the songs justice. Like we recorded a demo, but never played beyond like the New Wave or anything.
Right. Yeah.
So I booked last year. I booked a run of I guess it was 3 consecutive shows, and we did Providence and New Bedford and Boston of just Exposed Human Sharks shows.
Yeah,
and it was a lot of fun.
Nice.
And we got some good recordings of it. But there's a case in point of like that band was mothballed for like 18 years or something.
Yeah.
And then it's like, let's just do some shows.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be like a big deal.
Right, yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. You're just getting together and
yeah, and it was awesome. And we did the songs better. We were much better than we used to be.
Right.
And at the same time, I ran into my old friend Ryan Parker,
yeah.
Who had played in Third Age. He also played in Some Kind of Hate, the Jaded Salingers.
Oh, yeah.
And he had played, he had an experimental band with Jacob Bannon. It was like Super Machiner, I think.
Oh, yeah.
It was just the two of them.
Right.
But he was one of my friends from like way back.
Okay.
And we had always talked over the years of doing something, but it was never right. Like
right.
the time was always bad.
Yeah.
So I ran into him at an open studio. We each had like our kids and like walking around randomly, ran into each other. And I was like, Ryan, you know, like, let me get your phone number. Like, we should try to like do something finally. And he was like, yeah. I don't know, I'm busy, but no, we have to do this. We have to do this. So he contacted Jeremy Medeiros, who had been in Third Age with him back then.
Right.
He had been in ITI. He was also in Bury the Needle.
Oh, yeah.
And he was in Slow Death recently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I've known him from way back.
Right.
And then I had my friend Ted Ilsley. He had played drums in Blues Bastard.
Mm-hmm.
He had been in a bunch of bands, had recently agreed to be the next drummer for Gaskill, although we haven't gotten together.
Right.
And he'd been playing for my stupid Misfits cover
that
band
Misfits.
that I do.
Yeah.
Which is like a joke band.
Right.
But he's amazing.
Yeah.
But he had lived out in California. He had played drums in a band called Villainer that I had almost sung for. They were like kind of an instrumental band in Providence. Sick drummer.
Yeah.
And I roped him in. He didn't really know those other two guys.
Right.
That's what I've been doing for the past like 2.5 months.
Okay.
And it's going super well.
Wire lines, is it?
Yeah, wire lines.
Yeah.
It's hard, like Fugazi / Husker Du / like maybe like Eye Against Eye, Bad Brains.
Yeah. Nice.
Melodic. At times it's like, I don't know, it's all over the place. We have a song that like you'd swear is like a Cro-Mag song.
Oh yeah.
And then we have other songs where it's like borderline like Fire Hose or something.
Yeah.
So we're trying to like kind of leave our options open, but we're due to go record in like a week and a half.
Yeah.
We have about
nice.
6 songs ready, and hopefully playing shows really soon.
Yeah.
I think we're all really pleased with it.
Yeah.
It's been just really. I couldn't be happier to finally be working with these guys
right.
who I've always wanted to work with.
Yeah.
Our chemistry is really good, and we had to like force ourselves to stop writing songs because we're easily writing a new song from start to finish every single practice.
Oh, nice.
I was like, we gotta slow down. We just gotta slow down.
How do you feel about writing lyrics nowadays? You
I feel like I'm it's become a weird thing for me because I've been doing it for so long now.
Right.
And one of the things that I'll do is if I don't have a project, like if I don't have a song I need to write vocals for,
right.
I will not write.
Yeah.
I feel like that helps me so that when the time comes to write, I don't struggle.
Right.
Even if it's like I've got 2 bands at a time and they're both banging out songs, I can do it. And I feel like it's really important to keep my mind active. So I'm always reading books,
right.
watching movies. I feel like all of that stuff is sort of fuel.
And then gets pulled into...
Yeah, it's like it keeps... If my mind stays busy with new ideas that are things that are new to me, I always have new things to write about.
Yeah.
And where in the past when I was younger, it might take me days of going over and writing drafts and totally scrapping a song, coming back.
Right.
So now when I write, it will take me like, honestly, like maybe like 15 minutes.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not because it takes me that long to figure it out. It's just that like 95% of that work I'm doing all the time in my head.
Yeah, of course.
All the time. When I'm driving, when I'm eating, when I'm doing whatever.
Yeah.
Like the process is always going on. So, you know, writing down the final thing becomes a formality.
Yeah.
And it's also been a thing where I approach a song as though the song is done.
Mm-hmm.
When I get it and there's no vocals to it, the song is done, but like the vocals have been deleted.
Right.
And I need to just replace them and put them back in. So I look at it as like this song is finished.
Right.
And there are vocals and lyrics for this. I just need to listen and not screw up copying it down.
Right.
And so it becomes more of like a translation or like a court stenographer job than anything that requires a lot of heavy lifting on my part. That doesn't mean that I can't screw up that part.
Right. Has your process always been having like a song for the music first and then writing around it? It's easier for you.
Yeah, because I feel like my job as like a good singer, not that I'm a good singer, but in order to be a good singer, you need to cater what you're doing to the job.
Right.
It should be custom to the job.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be, and I know some people do this and are largely successful sometimes, but I feel like ideally it's a bad work habit to try to write separately and then mash it into somebody's piece of music.
Right.
Like what you write should be, you're writing to that piece.
Yeah. Right.
And if you force it the other way, I don't think it's very like respectful to that piece of music. Mm-hmm. It's a cobbled together thing. Yeah. You know, it ends up like half alligator and half crocodile.
Yeah. How do you like approaching covering, like, because the My War record I love that you guys did, because I think you guys definitely put your own kind of twist on it, so that's cool of you. Do you enjoy doing covers?
Yes and no.
Yeah,
it's a slippery slope. Yeah. I super enjoy it on some levels, but I feel like, especially as an older musician, it can be a black hole.
Yeah. Like
guys will just get sucked into like cover land.
Yeah, and they just want to do that.
It's easier to do. It requires less time invested. It has a quicker. It's easier to get people to pay attention and like it because it's familiar territory. Yeah. So it's kind of a cop out.
Yeah.
So it becomes, as you get older and frustrated, possibly with trying to hammer away with your own stuff, it gets more and more tempting to just go that route.
Right.
So like I have that horror business band, which some friends of mine in New Bedford were like, hey, Halloween, we're going to play Misfit songs. Nobody's dressing up.
Right.
We're going to have 3 people on guitar.
Right.
We'll maybe practice.
Right.
It's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
And it was a bloodbath, and it was awesome.
Right.
And then we did it a bunch more times. And as great as it is, there's always part of me that thinks, all you guys in the crowd, where are, like, would you have been there to see the Misfits in 1982?
Right.
I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like you guys are guys going to see cover bands.
Right.
And as much as you think we're doing awesome and you're going nuts for us, I feel, you end up feeling like it's like depressing on some levels. Like it's somebody else's thing.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And as good a job as we do with it, and as much fun as we have, it's somebody else's thing.
Right.
And you go back to doing your own thing that sometimes you feel like it's way better.
Yeah.
And those people are nowhere to be seen.
Yeah.
I would rather play in front of like 6 people,
right,
my own music,
yeah,
than 150 people going nuts.
Right.
And, it's the Misfits or something.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, that Black Flag thing, that was cool to do for that one night. And then to be able to record it without, like, any overhead was awesome. And for me, like, I've always loved that record. Mm-hmm. But part of, like, what I think about Black Flag is that they were, like, a cursed... They always had this dark cloud over all of their records. Yeah. Because, with the exception of the first few, because Damaged was written for a 4-piece band, but suddenly had 5 guys on it. Right. And they didn't really have songs that did justice to having 2 guitars on them. Right. Then they wrote 3 albums worth of material as a 5-piece band with 2 guitars, and were court ordered to not record them as a 5-piece band. And by the time that order was lifted, they had played with their, in my opinion, their greatest lineup. Yeah. Wrote all these songs with, and played, but could not record. Right. And by the time they were allowed to record, all these other guys had given up.
Yeah, Dukowski's
gone. They lost Chuck Biscuits, who was their best drummer, I think. Dez on second guitar flaked out into the DC-3. Yeah. I think Greg was concerned about how much impact Dukowski had on a lot of those songs, and didn't want to sort of share that. Yeah. And was gone to the point where they recorded My War as a 3-piece that had been written as a 5-piece. Yeah. And the production on it is horrifically bad. Yeah. And the songs are so ahead of their time and just extreme. I mean, the second side of that album is just, it's hard to even put into words what's going on there. It is a prime example of something that I love that's difficult to listen to. Yeah. It's hard to sit through that. Yeah. And through no fault of the record, it's just a very visceral thing to try to sit through that. Yeah. And it took a lot of courage, I think, to do that. Yeah. So I wanted to try to record a cover of the whole album as faithfully as we could without, like, forcing the issue. Yeah. But with the 2 guitars. Yeah. Playing 2 guitar parts. Yeah. With a decent studio, decent production. Because I felt like, not that we could do it any better than the My War album or than the 82 demos, but I still felt like at least we can have the songs recorded in a pro studio with 2 guitars, and with, like, a decent mix. Yeah. And, like, it still will, like, that still has to happen with these things. Yeah. It would be wonderful if, like, Off did it. Right. I mean, not Off. I'm Flag. If Flag did it.
Flag.
You know what I mean? Right. That'll never happen. Right. But I was just like, let's do it. We'll do the whole album start to finish. Yeah. But in the style of those 82 demos. Yeah. But with the production of, like, an actual studio and not, like, whatever that was going on. Yeah. So for me, it was like a labor of love, and, like, I truly wanted it to be like I love this record and we love these songs, and let's try to do our best by these songs. Them. Yeah. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It was really hard. It was hard to physically sing them. Yeah. It's just so different than, like, what I was doing. Yeah. And I wanted it. I didn't want to do my thing. Right. Like, I wanted to be somewhat faithful. Right. But Henry Rollins at 22 years old is not Kevin Grant at 41 years old. Yeah. I ended up I did the scratch vocals while they recorded at full volume. Mm-hmm. And then I recorded main vocals for all the songs, and then we went back and we erased them, and I re-recorded them all again. Oh, right. And then I went back and did my backing vocals over them, only because it took that long for my voice to be broken in enough to have it sound like what I wanted, where I wanted it to be. Yeah. But it was like a physically brutal. Right. It was a hard thing to do.
Yeah. Has there been any feedback from anyone from Black Flag or?
I talked to Dukowski a little bit.
Yeah.
Ahead of time.
Yeah.
Because I have zero experience with recording covers.
Right.
And we wanted to sell it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make sure that like we legally were doing things right.
Right.
It's a simple thing to do, but I didn't realize
right.
that. So I talked to him a little bit, and he was like super psyched. I talked to him via like social media, you know what I mean?
Right.
Super nice, gave a lot of insight into his writing of where he was coming from with some of the material.
Yeah.
And I was trying to get in touch with Greg Ginn.
Right.
It's probably a blessing in disguise that I never got in touch
right.
with him.
Yeah.
I talked to Rollins about it.
Yeah.
Just trying to get contact info.
Right.
And he at least steered me in the direction where he's like, well, legally you don't have to talk to him.
Right.
He's like, here's what you do, and he'll get his money, and he can't even stop it. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I spoke to Mike Vallely.
Oh, really?
Who's currently singing for them and is technically their
manager, right?
And it's funny because he's like, well, at least what he claimed was he's like, I don't really have a contact info for him. He's like, I haven't spoken to him in a long time. Yeah. And
right.
This was when I think they're active again now,
right.
for whatever that's worth. But
right.
And I think those are the people that I spoke to.
Yeah. They were talking about it on the that Mojack the podcast.
Yeah, I found out that they had mentioned it like months after the fact.
Yeah.
Which was very cool.
Yeah.
I've it's out there. I didn't. Again, it's kind of weird. Like, I don't want people to think I'm like this cover guy.
Band guy. Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
B, there's only so much that I want to promote a thing of covers that I did.
Right.
Like, it could be seen as like a kind of like parasitic move.
Yeah.
And
I hadn't even heard of that until I've known your bands, and that's when I heard it was on that podcast, and I was like, oh wow, these guys are from here.
If anyone is wondering, I actually pulled them off. They were up on like iTunes and Spotify, etc., and I pulled them down because you do have to pay yearly licensing fees,
right?
And I was paying more than we were bringing in on these songs.
Yeah.
So if anyone thinks that we're like getting rich off of like off of Greg Ginn's solo work on 3 nights.
Yeah.
So you can still get them on Bandcamp. A label that we are somewhat involved with technically has it up.
Nice.
And you can get it for free if you buy our End of the World album via Bandcamp.
Yeah.
The Black Flag album is there as a download.
Nice. And one other SST related thing was there's a video going around of you had sang with our mutual friends Northern Skulls doing Husker Du. That was really good.
I'm super excited. That song is on their soon to be released album.
Oh, right.
So I've known Jonah since The Hidden started, because we were on Track to 7 with our first EP.
Yeah.
Out of all of his bands, I wasn't super familiar with Only Living Witness or Milltown.
Okay.
I knew of Only Living Witness. I probably saw them at like Hardcore Fest a couple of times.
Right.
But I wasn't. It wasn't exactly the same circle.
Yeah.
Of bands that I was in, and however, when he was interested in The Hidden, I heard the Milligram album. This is Class War, and that's an album that's tough to listen to.
Yeah.
But then once you wrap your head around, and like figure out there's nothing wrong with your stereo.
Yeah, that one took me a while.
Then it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah,
this is like
that's an intense
nuts.
record. Yeah,
that's one of my. Like, forget about favorite local albums. That I would put that album up there with just about anything.
Yeah, favorite albums.
Just a perfect record.
Oh, yeah.
It's a perfect record.
Yeah.
The playing on it, the lyrics on it, the singing on it, the weird production on it, the songs, everything on that is it's a perfect album.
Definitely.
So Jonah, I was on a train for work. I was going down to New Jersey. I had to spend some time in New Jersey for work.
Yeah.
And I was killing time on my computer, and Jonah messaged me and was like, "Yeah, I have this new band. I want you to check this out. Just don't share it with anybody.
Right.
Here's a song." And I was like, man, this is like really good.
Yeah.
They're not what I expected, because you know, he had been a guy who, in a way that I respect and try to be conscious of myself, has been getting like heavier as years go by.
Exactly. Yeah, we've talked about that
in music. You know what I mean? And then the song he gave me, The Northern Skulls, was like, I mean, it's unbelievably catchy and melodic. You know what I mean? It is like. So he sent that to me, and I was like, wow, man, this is amazing. And he's like, well, I'd like you to come into the studio with us when we record and do some vocals on it. I was like, you give me the time of the day, man. I'm there. Yeah. And because I feel like Jonah and I as singers have a lot in common. Yeah. And we get along really well. Yeah. On lots of levels, but I think he and I are coming from very similar places as far as how we approach songs and songwriting and lyrics and stuff. And so I was just super happy and really I was like flattered to be asked. And so I went in. I went in not knowing what I was going to be doing. Right. I just had the date, and I showed up at the studio. Yeah. And that's when I met the rest of those guys. Yeah. And Jonah's like, yeah, can you sing like this song, and this song? And I heard them all for the first time. Yeah. I was only vaguely familiar with that Husker Du song. Yeah. Okay. But I did them, and they seemed to be really happy with it. So then I played with them at their first two shows. Their first show was at O'Brien's. Their second one was at the Sinclair. Right. And the record's 6 songs. Mm-hmm. I believe it's at the plant now. Yeah. I'm on 2 of the songs on the record, but I've been doing like 3 songs live with them. Nice. I'm hoping that their record and the Wirelines recording will probably come out around the same time. So I think the 2 bands will work really well, and I'd love to trade shows with those guys somehow. I get along really well with those guys, and I think they're a really exciting band. Yeah, yeah. You know, I always feel weird when if somebody was like, "Oh, what are you listening to now for new bands?" It's like, well, there's the Northern Skulls, but it's like all those guys have been around for a long time. You know what I mean? It's like it's a new band and new music, but
it's guys that
are veterans, like veterans. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You can tell, like all you guys are been around, and so that's cool, man. I definitely will wind it down.
Oh yeah,
and
it's fun. Like a 3-hour,
2 hours, but that's fine. It works for me.
Cool.
Thank you for coming down here.
Oh, thank you very much.
And cool. And so the band is Wirelines.
Wirelines. Yep.
Band. Yep. And thanks, man.
All right, I appreciate it.
Yeah.